Okay, so let's start. So good afternoon from India, and evening to those joining from Singapore. Welcome to yet another session from the World Trade Centers. My name is Vivek George, and I'm joined by my colleague Sandeep. Delighted to present before you today's session, which will discuss on the business opportunities between India and Singapore. As you're aware, the bilateral trade has crossed the 11 billion mark last year, and Singapore is today one of India's largest trading partners. The Comprehensive Economic and Cooperation Agreement signed between the two countries has in fact facilitated trade and investments, as well as created opportunities for collaboration in different sectors. So this webinar is presented to you by World Trade Center in partnership with the Valid Points Law Offices, which are headquartered out from Bangalore, and FastCorp Private Limited, who are based in Singapore. The objective here is to help you understand the market trends, the regulatory environment, and the best practices in doing businesses in India and Singapore. So I'm pleased to present to you our speakers for this program. Mr. Neeraj Dubey is a founder and managing partner at the Valid Points Law Offices India. And the second speaker is Mr. Kenneth Shee, who is the director at FastCorp Private Limited. Allow me to briefly introduce the two speakers to you. Neeraj is very popular at forums, and he has spoken at different webinars and in-person events at WTC. He comes with over nearly 2 decades of experience advising manufacturing and service companies. Over the years, Neeraj has advised clients on entry strategies in India. He possesses varied experience in drafting and reviewing legal documents and commercial contracts. He's an expert when it comes to handling corporate and commercial advisory, mergers and acquisitions, investments, etc. Neeraj is a recognized, recommended, and a ranked lawyer by various domestic and international legal rankings, such as Legal 500, ALB, and Lex Falcon. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Neeraj. Kenneth is a corporate lawyer. He comes with over 2 decades of experience working with leading law firms in Singapore. He has founded FastCorp in 2008, and the company has helped thousands of foreign companies ranging from startups to MNCs from over 50 countries to set up and expand their business in Singapore. FastCorp has worked with leaders of industries including AI, cloud computing, IT, bio and medtech, e-commerce, XM, consulting, and logistics. On behalf of everyone gathered here, I welcome Kenneth as well to this webinar. I am also pleased to welcome Ms. Emily Ho from FastCorp and Mr. Santanu from Valid Points Law Offices, who were instrumental in setting up this program. And let me also welcome Rudy Santana to the session. And participants, thank you for deciding to spend your next 90 minutes with us. We value it, and I hope today's program will be useful. A few of you have already passed on questions to us, which is already with the speakers. So I hope they will be touching upon those questions during their presentation. And thanks for that. And once again, I welcome each one of you. And with that, I conclude, and I now invite Neeraj for his presentation. Over to you, Neeraj.
Thanks, Vivek. Hi, everyone. So as Vivek mentioned, I'm Neeraj Dubey, managing partner of the Valid Points Law Offices. And today I'll walk you through the key aspects of a cross-border business, the crucial changes that India has seen recently in the regulatory space and the policy making, which has significantly increased the ease of doing business, the strategies for cross-border business, and the key legal considerations. So in the first slide, you'll see the key aspects of cross-border businesses. The global trade policies are dynamic and tend to fluctuate based on various factors, which can introduce an element of unpredictability in cross-border businesses. These policies are influenced by factors such as changes in governmental regimes, geopolitical conflicts, trade wars, economic recessions, or evolving priorities such as environmental concerns. Global supply chains are susceptible to various risks, including natural disasters, political unrest, labor strikes, transportation disruptions, and global pandemics like COVID-19. Any disruption in the supply chain can lead to significant delays, increased costs, and potential loss of business. In the era of digitalization, data has emerged as a crucial asset for business. However, with the increased reliance on data comes the challenge of data protection and privacy. Different jurisdictions have varying degree of regulations pertaining to data movement, usage, and storage, affecting businesses' operational efficiency. Currency exchange rates are subject to frequent fluctuations due to various economic indicators, geopolitical events, and market speculations, which can significantly impact the bottom line of businesses involved in international trade. Amidst these issues, the cross-border trade in the B2C segment has come up victorious and has emerged as a major growth avenue for businesses looking to expand their market reach, allowing selling of products or services directly from a business in one country to a consumer in another. In the context of cross-border trade, the ability to facilitate smooth and secure payment transactions becomes critical. This involves not only integrating multiple payment methods popular in the target market, but also ensuring compliance with local financial regulations, anti-money laundering laws, and providing a secure payment processing infrastructure to prevent fraudulent transactions and protect customer data. In the age of data-driven decision-making, leveraging analytical tools to gather deep insights about the market can give businesses a competitive edge. In the next slide, we'll see the significant changes that India has seen in the past few years. Propelled by the proliferation of smartphones, affordable internet access, digital literacy initiatives, and the supportive government policies, India has made significant strides in the realm of digitalization, which has transformed the way businesses operate. The Digital India Initiative of 2015, launched by the Government of India, aimed at transforming India into a digitally empowered society and knowledge economy. And through this initiative, the government has promoted the use of digital technologies to transform services, simplify procedures, and enhance transparency. Digitization has not just transformed the way businesses interact with customers, but also how they interact with each other and the government. It has opened new opportunities for businesses in areas like e-commerce, digital payments, online education, telemedicine, among others. The digital revolution has significantly impacted the financial sector, leading to the rapid growth of online payments, facilitated by the government's push towards a cashless economy and initiatives like the UPI. The adoption of online payments has grown exponentially. For businesses, this shift has implications for everything from sales to supply chain management. Online payments have simplified transactions, reduced the time taken to process the payments, and increased transparency and opened opportunities for businesses to reach a larger customer base, not restricted by geographical limitations. In the next slide, you'll see how the complex regulatory environment of India has changed, with businesses required to comply with numerous laws and regulations at the central, state, and local levels. In recent years, there has been a conscious effort by the government to simplify the regulatory environment and reduce the compliance burden on businesses. GST replaced multiple indirect taxes with a single tax, simplifying businesses and reducing the administrative burden on businesses. Overhauling of the labor laws with 4 codes aiming to consolidate numerous central labor laws, introducing the e-biz portal by the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade to provide a single window system for businesses to comply with various regulatory requirements and significant steps. In India, there has been a paradigm shift towards providing employers with more autonomy in creating rules and regulations to govern employer-employee conduct. The labor reforms aim to strike a balance between protecting workers' rights and providing a business with the flexibility to operate efficiently. Decriminalization of economic law, especially various minor offenses, and replacing them with civil penalties aim to create a more business-friendly regulatory environment. This shift towards less punitive and more remedial approach is expected to encourage compliance and reduce litigation. Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade has launched Business Reforms Action Plan, BRAP, with the aim of improving ease of doing business in India. BRAP includes a wide range of measures aimed at reducing regulatory burden, improving transparency, and making it easier for businesses to start, operate, and expand in India. Under BRAP, states and union territories are ranked based on their implementation of the reform measures, which promotes competition and encourages them to improve their business-friendly policies. The Indian government, to promote ease of doing business, has introduced a single form, SPICE Plus, which has revolutionized the process of incorporating a private limited company in India. With SPICE Plus, the services related to incorporation, permanent account number, director's identification number, the TAN number of the company, the PF registration, the ESI registration, opening of a bank account, and GST allotment have been integrated into one single application. This provides a one-stop solution for end-to-end incorporation services, thereby reducing the time and effort previously required. Moreover, the requirements of a company seal and minimum paid-up capital, which were earlier seen as roadblocks for new businesses, have been done away with. This has further simplified the incorporation process. The RBI has simplified processes for foreign entities looking to set up liaison office, branch office, and project office in India. These offices, they often serve as the first point of entry for foreign businesses looking to explore opportunities in the Indian market. The seamless process introduced by RBI has made it easier for these businesses to establish their presence in India. Like a Singapore-based manufacturing company looking to set up a liaison office in India can now submit their application online through the Foreign Investment Facilitation Portal, FIFP, which is a single window system for processing applications and allows the applicant to track the status of their application on a real-time basis. In a significant move towards transparency and ease of doing business, the Indian government has digitized land records across the country. This has provided a much-needed boost to the real estate sector. With a digital database, it is now possible to search for encumbrances on a property online, thereby reducing the time and resources previously required for this process. Similarly, any charges on a company property can also be seen on the MCA portal, which is Ministry of Corporate Affairs. This has brought a level of transparency and ease that was previously lacking in the sector. Payment of property tax and filing of grievances can also be done online, making the process much more convenient and efficient. A central registry of securitization, asset reconstruction, and security interest, CERSAI, as a unified electronic system for registration of transactions of securitization, asset reconstruction of financial assets, and creation of security interest over property has been created. This platform provides a debtor search function, aiding in due diligence and risk assessment. The Information Technology Act, which was amended last year and governs the digital landscape in India, now allows for the electronic execution of documents related to immovable properties. This provision has made property transactions more convenient and time efficient. The next slide, you see how the policy has been driving the investments in India. FDI policy of 2020 is a significant driver economic growth and a source of non-debt finance. India's FDI policy has been progressively liberalized to make the investment regime more investor-friendly. The policy aims to promote foreign investments in sectors that are crucial for the growth and development of the economy. The simplification of the FDI policy can be seen in various sectors. For example, in defense, the FDI cap has been increased from 49 to 74 under the automatic route, subject to certain conditions, beyond which it can be subject to government approval. In the single brand retail trade sector, the government has permitted 100% FDI under the automatic route. This has attracted international brands like IKEA and H&M to set up their operations in India. The ease in policy has also seen a significant increase in FDI inflows in recent years. The Reserve Bank of India has simplified the provisions for outward direct investments from India. ODI refers to the investments made by Indian entities in foreign joint ventures or wholly owned subsidiaries. The simplified provisions have provided a significant boost to Indian businesses looking to expand their operations globally. For instance, an Indian IT firm looking to set up a subsidiary in Singapore can now make the investment under the automatic route without the need for prior approval from RBI up to a specified limit of investment. Moreover, the processing of reporting ODI has also been simplified with the introduction of the online reporting system. In a significant move to protect the rights of minority shareholders, India has revised the limits for certain related party transactions. Previously, shareholder approval was required if the value of property to be purchased exceeded 10% or INR 1 billion, whichever was less. This provision has been amended to require shareholder approval if the value of the property is 10% or more of the net worth of the company, or INR 1 billion, whichever is less. For example, if a company with a net worth of INR 15 billion plans to purchase a property worth 1.5 billion INR from a related party, under the new provision, it would require the approval of the shareholders. This provision safeguards the interest of the minority shareholders by ensuring that the company does not engage in transactions with related parties that could potentially harm the financial health of the company. Moreover, this provision brings more transparency to the functioning of the company. The shareholders are given the right to vote on transactions that could significantly impact the net worth of the company, thereby ensuring that the interests of the minority shareholders are protected. In a bid to ensure better corporate governance, in Companies Act requires the members to meet at least once a year. This provision facilitates better decision making and ensure that the shareholders and also directors are abreast of the status and plans of the company. There are certain other provisions to ensure transparency and protect the interest of the shareholders in the Security Contracts Regulations Act and SEBI LODR regulations, which stipulate that certain transactions must be disclosed to the public, the regulator, and the stock exchange within 32 hours of such a transaction. For instance, if a company listed on the Indian Stock Exchange enters a significant transaction, it would be required to disclose the details within 32 hours to the public, regulator, and the stock. This ensures that the shareholder and the potential investors have timely access to the information that could impact the value of their investment. And finally, the requirement that the CEO and the chairman of the company or the chairman of the board of directors to be different individuals unless the articles of the company provide such appointment. So this aims to ensure that a balance of power is there in the company and it prevents concentration of authority in a single individual. Now let's see in the next slide the steps taken towards resolution of disputes. To expedite the resolution of commercial disputes and boost investor confidence, India has established commercial courts. These courts are a significant reform in the Indian judicial system, and they aim to make the resolution of commercial disputes quicker and more efficient. Commercial courts handle disputes relating to commercial transactions between businesses. The establishment of these courts has resulted in faster resolution of disputes, thereby reducing the time and cost involved in litigation. The National Judicial Data Grid is a significant step towards digitizing the judiciary in India. It is an online platform that provides case data, including case registration, cause list, orders, and judgments of court, district-wise across the country. This is not only a tool for litigants and lawyers, but also a managerial tool for judges and court administrators. It provides crucial statistics about the pendency of cases, types of cases, and their distribution across various courts in the country. This data can be used to identify bottlenecks and design strategies for reducing pendency and improving the efficiency of the courts. In response to the digital revolution and the need for efficient case management, India introduced e-filing of cases and online or virtual court hearings, which continues to happen even today. E-filing allows lawyers to file cases online, reducing the need for physical filings. This is particularly beneficial even for foreign companies or individuals who can now file cases without the need to physically being present in the court. The Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, introduced in 2016, has revolutionized the process of resolving insolvency in India. It provides a time-bound process for resolving insolvency and has significantly improved the ease of doing business. Under the IBC, a fast-track corporate insolvency resolution process, CIRP, has been introduced for mid-sized companies. Under this process, insolvency resolution must be completed within 90 days with a grace period of 45 days, which is significantly shorter than the 180-day plus 90-day extension for the regular CIRP process. There are certain key bilateral trade agreements between India and Singapore, and the most significant one is the Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement of 2005. This agreement has 4 key components: a free trade agreement in goods, an arrangement for boosting trade in services, including financial services, a package to promote investment flows and provide mutual investment protection, and a new agreement for avoiding double taxation. So it includes mutual recognition agreements on quality certification of goods and services, liberalized visa rules for professionals, and undertakings to cooperate on several sectors like customs, dispute settlement, IP, education, and e-commerce. And CCA has also resulted in the signing of a protocol amending the double taxation avoidance agreement. The second key agreement is the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement of 2009. The framework agreement on comprehensive economic cooperation between ASEAN and India was signed in 2003 October and served as legal basis to conclude further agreements, including the Trade in Goods Agreement, Trade in Services Agreement, and Investment Agreement that form the ASEAN-India Free Trade Agreement. India and Singapore have linked their digital payment system, UPI and PayNow, to enable instant and low-cost fund transfer in a major push to disrupt the cross-border flow of money between the two nations that amounts to more than 1 billion each year. Citizens in each nation can use their local payment systems to send money to those in the foreign land in real time. The PayNow UPI linkage is India's first cross-border real-time system linkage and Singapore's second. It is also the world's first such linkage feature, cloud-based infrastructure and participation by non-bank financial institution. With this background, let us see in the next slide the successful cross-border investment in 2 cases. The first is the DBS Bank, based in Singapore, which offers an exemplary model of successful navigation through India's regulatory environment. In 2016, DBS Bank launched a comprehensive digital banking platform in India and used technology to offer round-the-clock virtual banking services, which resonated with the tech-savvy Indian consumers. A significant aspect of DBS Bank's success was its ability to turn regulatory challenges into opportunities. DBS leveraged India's Aadhaar biometric identification system and the UPI system for customer onboarding and transactions. DBS's successful entry in the Indian market underscores the importance of understanding the local market, adapting to local preferences, and complying with regulatory requirements. Similarly, in the Vistara airline case in the next slide, the revision of the air services agreement between India and Singapore in 2005 led to a significant increase in the connectivity between the two countries, allowing more airlines and leading to a significant increase in the number of weekly flights. A noteworthy development was the entry of Vistara, a joint venture between Singapore Airlines and Tata Group, into the Indian market. In 2023, Singapore Airlines has announced its plans to convert its 49% stake in Vistara into a 20% stake in the new Air India Group. The planned merger between Singapore Airlines and Air India Group projected to be completed by March 24 and is expected to create a stronger entity capable of competing more effectively in the global aviation market. This development underlines the opportunities that foreign companies can tap into in the Indian market with the right strategic moves and partnerships. Now let us see in the next slide the key strategies for cross-border business. It is crucial to understand the diversity of the market by conducting detailed demographic analysis to tailor offerings accordingly. A deep understanding of consumer behavior is crucial, like price sensitivity, brand loyalty, and the importance of family in decision making. Businesses need to study digital market trends to tap the market by online shopping, digital payments, and the use of social media platforms. And in India, we see all these are crucial aspects to understand the market. Forming strategic alliances with local companies can help penetrate the market more effectively. Joint ventures can provide a strong platform, and hiring local talent can be beneficial. Local employees understand the market, culture, and regulatory environment better and can provide valuable insights and connections. Investing in legal advice is crucial to understand the regulatory environment, corporate governance, taxation, labor, environment, and much more. Businesses need to stay informed about rapid regulatory and policy changes to adjust their operations accordingly. Implementing robust compliance programs can help businesses ensure that they are adhering to all relevant laws and regulations. Success in market requires a long-term perspective. Building relationships with partners, customers, government officials, and other stakeholders is a crucial part of doing business. Evaluate the initial cost of setting up the business, the regular operating cost, and regulatory compliances. Local sourcing of raw materials, equipment, or labor can help reduce costs. Adopting advanced technology can help improve in the efficiency and reduction of costs in the long run. Fluctuations in the exchange rate can impact costs and revenues. Businesses can use hedging strategies to protect against adverse currency movements. Considering local financing options can also reduce exposure to currency risks. And finally, engaging in tax planning to improve tax efficiency. Make use of the DTA between India and Singapore to avoid being taxed twice on the same income. Be aware of the GST refund policies. Now, in the next few slides, you'll see the legal, regulatory, and other aspects of business and law which impacts any cross-border transaction. As a law firm, the Valid Points Law Offices provides all legal, regulatory, document management, data protection, investment-related, business transaction, and cross-border supply of goods and services to individuals and companies. The next 3 slides cover the key legal considerations for the parties interested in doing cross-border business in India or Singapore. Any individual or company looking for doing business in India needs to know these basic laws, these basic aspects. FEMA is the primary regulatory mechanism for foreign transactions in India, along with FEMA export of goods and services regulations and FEMA borrowing or lending in foreign exchange regulations. And they govern import-export of goods and services, borrowing and lending in foreign currency, and investments by foreign entities in India. The FDI policy outlines the sectors in which foreign investment is permitted and the conditions for such investments. The policy provides for automatic approval for most sectors. While certain sectors require government approval from the Department of Financial Services, Ministry of Finance through the Foreign Investment Facilitation Portal. Press Note 3 of 2020 requires government approval for any investment from countries sharing a land border with India. Companies in Singapore with substantial Chinese investment might be affected by this regulation. The type of entity a foreign company can establish in India is governed by different laws, and accordingly, scope of work and compliances are determined. For example, a liaison office can act as a channel of communication between the head office and the entities in India and cannot undertake any business activities and can only undertake activities permitted by the Reserve Bank of India. In India, the Income Tax Act is the primary legislation governing taxation of income and covers computation, levy, collection, and recovery of income tax. And to avoid double taxation, India has a double taxation avoidance agreement with Singapore. The Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement of 2005 aims to strengthen bilateral trade by eliminating tariff barriers, improving market access, and promoting closer economic cooperation between the two countries. One of the key benefits of this is the provision for tariff concessions on specific products exported to India, subject to compliance with the rules of origin requirements, which stipulate that a certain percentage of a product's components must originate from Singapore for the product to be eligible for tariff concessions. The Information Technology Act is the primary law dealing with cybercrime and electronic commerce. It provides the legal framework for data protection, cybersecurity, and electronic transaction. Intellectual property rights provide legal protection for creation of mine, ranging from industrial designs, patents, trademarks, to copyrights. India provides a comprehensive framework for the protection of IP. Contracts form the bedrock of business transaction. In India, the formation, execution, and interpretation of contracts are governed by the Indian Contract Act of 1872. And for a Singaporean company entering a contract with an Indian vendor, the terms and condition of that contract, as well as any disputes arising from it, if Indian law is chosen as the governing law, would be governed by the provisions of this legislation. Now, in this slide, next slide, we see that if an Indian individual or company wishes to do business in Singapore, it must understand the foreign trade policy of India, obtain an import-export code from DGFT to import or export goods. As per the Customs Act, goods entering or leaving India must pass through customs and may be subject to duties. Depending on the nature of business and goods, various business-related licenses and or product-specific regulations and standards like BIS or FSSAI license would be required, including sectoral conditions. The DGFT notifies certain goods as prohibited or restricted for import-export, and there are trade agreements which influence the tariff and non-tariff barriers on specific goods. The foreign trade policy of 2015-20 encourages MSMEs to participate in international trade and merchandise exports from India scheme and the services exports from India scheme. They provide incentives for exporters. And double taxation avoidance agreement exists between India and Singapore. The rates of tax, including any tax related to, say, capital gains and tax deduction at source, the DTA provisions will apply. In the next slide, you see that if an expat is sent on assignment to India, an employee who is sent by their employer to carry out a service in Singapore or India for a temporary period, or has dual employment, a local employment contract is created for the expat worker besides the home country employment contract. And third situation, where an employment is without establishment, when the home entity does not have any legal presence in the foreign country and it employs someone locally. In all the three situations, the key facts to clarify are, first, the purpose, which should be outlined in the agreement. All the paperwork which would be entered by the said employee and the organizations, both the organizations. And this would also be required in the visa. What is the purpose of this arrangement? What would be the duration of stay? This would be necessary for visa and taxability. The status of employment to determine taxability, the paperwork and social security benefits, the salary for visa and taxation. Job function is necessary for visa. Social security. There's no social security agreement between India and Singapore, but the CCA excludes Singapore personnel from being the international worker in India. So they continue to get social security in Singapore. The perquisites, fringe benefits such as accommodation, car, employee stock option, education benefits, these are crucial for paperwork and taxation. If the expat is coming alone, then it's fine. The above aspects are crucial. But if the expat is coming with family, there are additional paperwork and visa requirements for the family. If the family is dependent or you have a working spouse working in a different organization, then the process would be separate from the process which would be followed for the said expat. As per India's Bureau of Immigration, foreign national can work in India by obtaining an employment visa. which is typically given for the job contract period, or 2 years, whichever is less. The foreign national must be a highly skilled and or qualified professional being engaged by the company in India on a contract on an employment basis. Employment visa is not granted for routine clerical or secretarial work. It can be extended in India up to 5 years from the date of issue, depending on the validity of the contract or the validity of the passport. And foreigners who visit India must register themselves with the FRRO within 14 days of arrival if their stay exceeds 180 days. With this, I complete my journey of slides here. Now I pass on the baton to Kenneth, so that Kenneth can present to us the Singapore side of story.
Hey, thanks so much, Neeraj. Yeah, that was fantastic. There's a wealth of information there. I'm truly blown away. There's so much there, and I will definitely be following up with you to explore a little bit further on some of those very interesting points you touched on. And you've given us, such a broad, swath of information covering all the key strategies, right, for cross-border, kind of like business expansion between India and Singapore. So what I propose to do is to just touch a little bit more on the Singapore-specific issues. We have, we've seen a lot of questions come in prior to this, and also, we understand there's a very big Indian crowd here today, and welcome everyone. And I'm sure, as you know, I've been doing this for many, many years with basically processed over, I think, almost 30,000 leads and questions from Indian businesses trying to understand a little bit more about Singapore and what are these in some cases misconceptions, and in many cases just trying to get a better clarity on what these concepts really mean. So I propose to focus on those few key issues, a few key points which everyone asks. So I have that big data, and I'm going to touch on, for everyone's benefit here, those few key points which we have thousands of people coming to us every year asking us about these questions. They'll give you a little bit of better understanding and flavor of how it's possible to basically expand your business or start a business in Singapore. Yeah. So I'll just start by just explaining a little bit about who we are. So I founded Fast Corp. I used to practice law for about almost 2 decades, and I founded Fast Corp, which is a fully integrated corporate services firm. We basically service clients from all across the world. The next slide, please. And one of the biggest things that we do here is what you see on screen, the remote online registration. So it's actually possible, and I hope it's possible to in India, but in Singapore, it's today, thanks to COVID, possible to actually set up your business and get a bank account open. All of this completely online. You don't have to actually travel to Singapore, right? So imagine that you can just remotely start your business and manage your business, manage the bank account, everything remotely. Yeah. Is that the case as well in India, Neeraj?
So see, Singapore is #1 in ease of doing business. So it has all the facilities. We are still in, I think, 62 or 63rd rank. We are improving very fast, but we are yet to catch up and reach that stage when everything can be done online. But of course, in terms of opening a bank account or setting up of the companies, it can be completely done remotely.
Okay, excellent. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so basically, we have clients coming to us basically saying, how do I set up a business? Just let me know. And some of these questions have come in, right? What's the process? Basically, it's really simple, right? As you can see here, these are the broad steps, right? And we are at OCBC Bank, Prestige Partner, and they have a very big share of the market when it comes to newer setups of foreign-owned companies by foreigners. So basically, there's a process where ourselves, as well as the banks, they would have to undergo KYC, right? Know your client obligations. So we gather some documents, just some basic documents about the owners and the existing business, and we go for a 15-minute video call, and everything is done online. Can I have the next slide, please? So as I mentioned, we service clients from all around the world. Needless to say, the biggest swath of clients come from the biggest countries in the world, which would be India and China. So India is a very big, market for us. We have been serving clients from India for many years, and have basically spoken with thousands of Indian businesses, managing thousands of companies set up by Indians. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. Okay, so this gives a broad idea of the services that we do, and the reason why this slide is here is also for you to understand, right, in one look, what you would need to do in terms of compliance, right? When you set up your business in Singapore, it's very similar in most countries. In Singapore, it is required by law to basically have a named company secretary, to get your financial statements, your financial reports done every year, right? And get your taxes filed, your corporate taxes. And contrary to popular belief, we do get clients often coming to us saying, "Hey, Singapore is a tax-free country. I'd like to set up a free zone, a company in the free zone in Singapore where there's no taxes." That's not the case. So all companies are expected to pay taxes here. The bank will ask you, the very first question the bank asks you is, please confirm that you will be paying taxes in Singapore. So just to dispel any myth there. And then, of course, payroll obligations, all the filings, and and of course, immigration, work passes. If any foreigner wants to come to work in Singapore, you need to actually obtain a work pass, and I'll be touching on that a little bit more. Next slide, please. So why register your company in Singapore? This is a very pertinent question, and we get thousands of people coming to us asking us why. Why should I register a company in Singapore? We've heard of how there's so much collaboration between India and Singapore, and for that matter, Singapore and many other countries as well, right? And we wonder sometimes, why is there so much, news and so much excitement around that? Of course, Singapore as a country has grown in leaps and bounds. We are still much smaller than India, and can't compare with the behemoth that India is. But there are some benefits, right? Over the years that the government has very proactively, the Singapore government has very proactively and very deliberately positioned Singapore for, right? To be everyone's friend, right? And basically to be very friendly in terms of business. So these are some of the few key points which I'd like to touch on. Usually these are factors which clients feedback to us as what's really important. So we have a very efficient tax regime. There's no capital gains taxes, right? And there's, again, as Niraj has mentioned, there's a very comprehensive DTA between India and Singapore, and of course, many other countries. There are no capital controls. So Singapore doesn't have capital controls. You're free to invest into Singapore and take back your capital. There's no exchange control. So technically, there's no voluminous sets of documents that you need to submit to the banks before you make any remittances. You simply go online and a couple of clicks and you remit payment to your suppliers and your and that sort of thing. So and of course we have a very strong legal system like India, and our Singapore Arbitration International Arbitration Center has done very well over the years. It's grown very big. I think very importantly, Singapore has, our government has, to their credit, and hats off to our government, very carefully ensured that we have a very strong and stable political scene, political environment here. And that's very good for businesses, because you don't have, the question of what's going to happen next, right? What's going to happen for the next 5-10 years. Our policies has been very consistent as well. And, there's very liberal ownership requirements. Basically, it's 100% foreign ownership is permitted across all business sectors. And this basically has, attracted a lot of businesses. We are seeing many exciting businesses, not just in the simple ones, but the very complex ones. The fintechs, for example, many of them are owned by foreigners. Many of them started by Indian entrepreneurs. And we have a very efficient banking system. Right? We're well known for that. The banks here are very careful. They're very well regulated. Yet they've managed to strike that balance between being careful in terms of regulation and KYC, at the same time being very efficient. So that's difficult to achieve. It takes a lot of effort, a lot of finances, a lot of resources. The banks have invested very heavily into that, guided by our central bank, MES. And of course, we have a world-class transportation, and we are a world-class transportation hub. Government has, like India, we've built a very strong airlines, and our airlines and our logistics facilities are very strong, and we're well known for, of course, MICE, right? Events and all that as well. So So these are some of the main key factors which we keep coming across as the reasons why businesses start up here. Next slide, please. So in the next couple of slides, I'll touch on a few key points, right? Elaborate on a few key points which make a lot of sense to a lot of business owners. And leveraging of these few concepts, you might be able to better understand why you should, how you can use Singapore to grow your business, right? So Singapore comes with a very strong brand of legitimacy, if I may say so. This is the feedback that we get from dealing with thousands of business owners coming to us to help them set up their branches, their subsidiaries, or their parallel businesses here. And they tell us that being a Singapore company helps them to be able to deal with the world at large, not just one or two geographies or territories, but to the world at large, right? Because Singapore is highly regulated, there's very strong rule of law, there's very vigilant enforcement of laws here. So because of that, that reputation of it being very well regulated, clean, and orderly, that makes a lot of difference, right? And financial integrity and the business continuity that the brand brings. And next slide, please. So the other thing that I like to just say in very simple words here is that Singapore has been positioned as everybody's friend. And that matters to a lot of businesses. We've seen a lot of issues of late between, say, the Western world and the Far East. We've had businesses literally have no choice but to move here because they are blocked on Play Store, kind of thing. So because Singapore is everyone's friend, our government has put a lot of effort into maintaining that neutrality. This makes a big difference. We literally have comments from many businesses from all countries all around the world. Whenever there's some tensions that arise, they say that, look, we want a platform where we can trade easily, where we can get onto the books of the customers and not have to deal with all sorts of questions, right? So because of that, I guess we're ranked number one, globally for ease of business, right up there, as Niraj pointed out. And also, this is further kind of shored up the fact that we have a very strong banking and money scene. Next slide, please. The tax regime here, just in case you didn't know, it's a very efficient tax regime. Corporate tax is at 17%, and it's a very stable system, right? So our government doesn't change this very often at all, right? It keeps it very constant and consistent over the decades. So I think that's very important. That we do have a single tier tax system, so there's no tax on dividends once corporate tax has been paid. So that in itself is already a very big advantage as well. This is something which our clients feedback to us. And then there's the foreign dividend tax exemption, where if the headline rate in the country of the subsidiaries, if you have a Singapore holdco and subsidiaries around the world, if in their jurisdictions, corporate tax rate the headline rate is 15% or more, then when those dividends come in from those subsidiaries into Singapore, those dividends will be exempt from tax. So these are, in a nutshell, very big reasons why businesses set up here, why many headquarters are set up here, why many holding companies are set up here, why, for example, a lot of the venture capitalists, the big institutional fund management companies, asset managers, they would say, please set up a Singapore holdco. Next slide, please. And as I mentioned, we are a leading banking hub, right? There's been a very big shift of attention towards Singapore as well in recent years, and in particular, what we've seen in recent times, because of the situation in Hong Kong, there's been a lot of interest, right, for banking solutions here in Singapore. Companies that have been around in some of these other jurisdictions for many years are moving their businesses here. So, I think the banking really makes a big difference, right? Of course, you need to have that ability to bank, right? And there's also been a lot of fintech companies that have come up recently to come up with new innovative solutions. And this has made also, kind of gotten our banks to be a little bit more competitive as well, right? And as I mentioned, there's no capital controls, no forex restrictions. Again, so these are factors which really make a big difference, especially to, say, trading companies, right? And on the forex restrictions. And next slide, please. So intellectual property protection is something which we all care about, and in particular, the technology companies or companies that are big brands, right? So we do have a very strong legal system, and our master plan basically has been mapped out for basically to turn us into an IP hub. These are the reasons why some companies like Google, besides having obviously big offices in the likes of India and big markets, right? Singapore, although we are a small market, right, in terms of population size, many of these countries you would have noticed do set up regional headquarters here. One of the reasons is because of the strength of our IP protection regime. Next slide, please. So this slide just would just be on this topic of ownership as well as the resident director. These are questions that we keep getting over and over again. At some point, these questions come up, right? So just like to help everyone understand that there are no requirements for local ownership of a company, of a Singapore company, right? You can be 100% owner of a Singapore company. However, you do need to have a resident director. Sometimes amongst business people, we use the terms interchangeably or in a very colloquial sense. And people come to me saying that, hey, I understand I need to have a local partner, right? So let's be clear here. There is no requirement for a local owner, right? You do need to have a local resident director, right? So this is a control mechanism. Our government wants to ensure there's a very strong rule of law, a strong quality control to ensure that companies are managed in a professional, orderly manner. So the onus falls on all the directors, right? In the eyes of the law, all directors are treated the same. All directors are responsible to ensure that companies are run responsibly, right? And there's definitely a need for at least one resident, right? The technical term is resident director, to ensure that the government has an easy way of reaching out to the company and keeping the company accountable. And of course, this helps also with economic substance, right? If you don't have someone on the ground, you'll be happy to know that in Singapore, there is an industry of professional resident directors. It's important, of course, to have someone who has a good, clean background and who understands his obligations and responsibilities. And so this is what we help clients with on a very regular basis. So it is actually possible. It's not a problem. And next slide, please. So the thing is that many people come to me and saying, please help me with your audits and all that. It is a good thing to note that, and you'll be happy to know that actually a majority of companies are not required to be audited, right? So technically, you're not required to be independently audited. This is not to be confused with the fact that as a Singapore company, you do need to prepare financial statements, right? And these financial statements have to be prepared in accordance with Singapore reporting standards, right? Financial reporting standards. So you should get it professionally done, right? Nevertheless, there is no requirement for many companies as they are exempted, right, from being audited. So there's no requirement for them to be independently audited. This helps bring down business costs, right? The audit exemption works like this. If you fall below 2 out of these 3 criteria that you see on the screen, right? So turnover of 10 million Singapore dollars, assets of 10 million Singapore dollars, including your receivables, right? And 50 employees. So if you are, say, a very big trading company and you're doing 200 million of international trade, right? So your turnover is large, but you don't have a big book of receivables. You only have a couple of guys here sitting in Singapore, or maybe not even at all, right? Technically, you don't need to be independently audited. So the cost of maintaining a company gets drastically brought down. Having said that, there is a cost to maintaining your Singapore company. We are not like, say, some of these very, very low cost jurisdictions where you, for $300 US, you basically register a name and then you start using that. That doesn't work this way. I mean, there's the requirement to have a resident director, a resident secretary. So these are people who have to take responsibility for the company. So there's a certain regulatory cost there. Next slide, please. So, trading companies have been coming here and setting up here from all corners of the world for many, many decades, right? Centuries, I would say. And one of the big reasons is that we are a very big entry port, right? Goods coming or trade coming through Singapore. In many cases, the goods do not even enter Singapore. It's what we loosely refer to as high seas trading, So we become like an invoicing hub. That's very achievable here in Singapore. And if the goods do not actually enter into Singapore, they don't come past our port line, then basically there's no requirement to actually file GST. And you don't charge GST, of course, because this is considered out of scope trading. So it becomes very easy for trading companies to actually utilize that platform for easy banking, that very good, strong brand reputation to basically trade around the world. And we've seen many big companies, many big commodities traders, and big trading companies actually set up here in Singapore, and the headquarters are here. For commodities trading in particular, there's a global trader program where you're even able to go to the government and say, I would like to set up my headquarters here, and could you please give me a concessionary corporate tax rate, so it comes down from 17% to a much lower rate. And we do have free trade zones, so I'd like to again elaborate on this concept. So there's no free trade zone in the case of corporate income tax, but there are free trade zones when it comes to GST, right? Value added tax, right? So if goods happen to actually come into Singapore physically, but they stay within the free trade zone, the bonded warehouses, then of course, right, that's needless to say, right, considered still as not having come into Singapore, and there's no VAT imposed, and it's out of scope trading. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about tech companies and the technology industry. So this has grown pretty massively in, I would say, the past 10 years, and in particular the past 5 years. I mean, everywhere around the world, because of the COVID situation, technology companies have grown massively. But in Singapore in particular, this trend started a little bit earlier, before COVID. Our government tried to really promote, and has been trying to promote, Singapore as a leading hub for venture capital, for technology, and all of that since the late 90s, early 2000s. And we did get a good shot in the arm back then, but we've been steadily building on that reputation, and in particular, I would say that in the past decade, it has really gone up in a big way. So most of the big venture capital firms, the big asset management firms, PE firms, are all here, represented here now, right? And of course, many of the boutique ones as well. There's a very high concentration of finance talent here in Singapore, because many of the big banks, the international banks, have big offices here. So naturally, some of that spills into the asset management industry, and this has been happening steadily for the past couple of decades. So lately, or at present, here we are with basically over 1,000 asset management firms. Many of them are very big ones. Sequoia Capital is here, and again, many of the big tech companies are actually headquartered here. So we've got Google, we've got Facebook, we've got the Chinese guys, we've got ByteDance, we've got even homegrown Singapore companies. And I know it's pretty amazing the kind of traction that you have in Mumbai and Bangalore and Singapore. A little bit of that has been happening here as well. So we're seeing a very, very similar kind of trend here in terms of tech. Yeah. So one of the reasons why many of these big companies, or even startups, tech startups, come to Singapore is because of this, right? So there's a concentration of asset management firms here. So you just drive down the road and a coffee or a beer with the guys over at Sequoia Capital, or again, other reasons would be that many of the professionals in big tech firms like living in Singapore. It's pretty modern and conducive place to live. And as I mentioned, intellectual property protection is really big here, and of course the tax treaties, right? And and the various reasons I mentioned just now in my slide earlier. So there's been a very big push and a very big development here for tech companies. We're seeing very large Series A, Series B deals in the in the region of 100 million Singapore dollars. That's common nowadays. Years ago, that wasn't the case, right? Yeah, I mean, if you're a tech company, I think you would do well to have both an office in Mumbai or Bangalore or any of the leading tech centers in India, as well as an office here in Singapore, primarily for these reasons. Next slide, please. touch a little bit on immigration requirements here. So just to be very clear, right? I have a question actually submitted earlier. How do I, travel to Singapore for business? So you are only required to obtain a work visa, a work pass, and the employment pass is an example. If you are a foreigner wishing to live and work here, you don't actually need to have an employment pass or a work visa if you are not going to be living here. If you're just coming in here for a business meeting, right? And for Indian passport holders, you can come anytime and stay for a month, I believe, right? So just get your visa from your travel agent, whether you specify, you tick the box for business, you tick the box for leisure travel or holiday, it doesn't matter, right? That's a short-term visa. What we're talking about here on screen is a long-term visa, and you only need long-term visas if you want to stay on an extended basis, right? For 2 years at a go, for example. And our government does have a very well thought through, regime to handle these work visas. We have hundreds of thousands of inquiries, people wanting to actually set up shop here in Singapore, business owners who want to come here and live here, expats who are working with big tech companies or other MNCs coming here to live here. So our government has to balance all of these. There's a lot of demand for this, and Singapore is a very small island. So of course we can accommodate everyone who wants to come, but there needs to also be a filtration process. So our government does have certain criteria. A lot of it is not actually written, right, or published on their website, but in general, in order to obtain an employment pass under the current regime, right, it generally is pretty, the government is very reasonable. You would have to demonstrate sufficient funds in the employing entity's bank account. So for example, if you were to set up a Singapore company, right, whether it's a subsidiary or whether it's a brand new standalone company, and to do trading or IT or consulting or whatever it is, and you say that, hey, I want to move to Singapore, you can actually do so, right? Even as the business owner, you can. It's not an owner's visa or anything like that. You can straight away just apply for an employment pass as an employee of that Singapore company. You would become an employee of the Singapore company. You tell the government that you need to basically be situated in Singapore to get your job done, and the government would be typically very reasonable and say, demonstrate that you've got sufficient funds in the bank account, a couple of contracts, maybe take a small service desk, a co-working space arrangement, and you get your visa, right? That might be tightening from September this year, as there's been tremendous demand for that. So for more details, we can always touch on that. You can always use the QR code and arrange for a separate session. I'll be happy to sit down with you for couple of minutes just to explain how the regime will be tightening. Yeah, I don't want to bore everyone with too much details here. But once you basically get your employment pass, you can then bring your family here on a dependent pass, right? Typically, that's not a problem, right? Once the employment pass is approved, you can get dependent passes for your family members, right? And typically, it's granted for 2 years. Sometimes we see 3, rarely 5. Technically, you can apply for 5 years, but that's rarely given. Next slide, please. So this slide just touches on this little point of how many family offices, right, have been setting up in Singapore. You might have heard about that trend. And for those of you who don't know what a family office is, basically it's a company or business set up by a high net worth family. And the business of that family, of that company, is to manage the assets of the family. So asset management in general is a specifically licensable business. If you were to set up a business in Singapore, in general, like trading, IT, general consulting, you don't actually need to obtain a further license. Just the company registration is sufficient for you to actually run your business. However, there are certain areas which are specifically licensable, such as, for example, if you were to set up a medical clinic or set up a law firm, right? Asset management, any form of asset management work or services is specifically licensable, of course. And for that, technically, if you were to set up your family office, you would need a license, right? Because the law says so. So what our government does is it gives you, if you're a high net worth family, the government gives you an exemption to run that business here. And not only that, with the next slide, can I take a look at the next slide, please? So the government basically, why has there been a sudden upsurge in family offices in Singapore? I think the number is close to 1,000 now. This information is a little bit outdated, but basically we're close to 1,000. And there's a long queue of family offices applying to come here from all around the world. It's because our government gives a very interesting tax break, right? It's called the Section 13O tax exemption or 13U tax exemption under Income Tax Act. Basically, it exempts the profits generated from the activities of the family office trading vehicle, right? So if you buy and sell Microsoft shares, or Google shares, or whatever it is, and you make a profit, if that's a trading profit, technically you have to pay 17% income tax. But now you don't have to pay tax at all because it's specifically exempted by the government. So that's one of the reasons why you've probably been hearing a lot in the news about family office setting up here. Next slide, please. So this just gives you a brief idea about how you would set up a family office. Basically, you would have the SFO, which is the asset management firm, which would get the exemption to manage funds in a special purpose vehicle, the investment fund, right? That can be a Singapore company, or that can be a VCC. So for those of you who are more tuned in on the corporate finance scene, you might have heard about the VCC, the Variable Capital Company. So that's something which came up in recent years, very recently, and it's basically designed for funds and soon to be family offices. I believe our government will be liberating that for family offices as well. So with a VCC, you can manage separate sub-funds within that one legal entity, and each of those sub-funds can have their own defined set of rights and liabilities, right? So you can manage each of these sub-funds for different investors. So that's, again, some recent development and initiatives by our government to turn Singapore or to keep Singapore ahead, right, of the game in terms of the financial industry. Next slide, please. So this gives you just a very brief overview of the process and the thought process behind setting up a family office, right? I won't go into too much here because I know it's getting late. And I want to leave some time for the Q&A. So I believe this will be, perhaps I can hand the time over to Vivek and Niraj for the Q&A.
Thanks, Kenneth. Thanks, Neeraj, for sharing your insights on the topic. It matters, whatever you have shared, I'm sure, and it will be helpful to those who are looking forward to doing business in both the countries. Neeraj's presentation has been quite comprehensive, and a few of you have already asked for the presentation. Yes, this recording will be shared with you over email, and you can also find the recording of this program on our Chennai page, the World Trade Center Chennai page, Facebook page. So it is going we are streaming it live there as well. So the link will be available immediately after this session, but otherwise it will be mailed to you. So Kenneth, thank you for detailing. There were a lot of questions on the, the cost factor and also the ease of doing business, which you, rightly covered during your talk. And thanks to Neeraj as well, because there were a few questions that came in. But I'm sure, since Neeraj had answered those questions privately, Neeraj, I suppose, we'll bring it up for the benefit of the larger audience. So maybe, Kenneth, you can also answer a few of those questions. So Srinivasan is looking out for customers for sourcing parts from India. So Srinivasan, I've already written to you. If you have any, detailed interest in one of the cities or countries, you can reach out to World Trade Center. I've texted you my email ID. We will try evaluating the possibilities of connecting. Otherwise, both Kenneth as well as Neeraj coordinates will be shared over an email after the session. You can reach out to them as well. I'm sure they'll be happy to help you. Srinivasan again has a question on ease of doing business, which Neeraj has answered, but I'll bring it up again. When the ease of doing business is improved, he's asking what are the checkpoints to stop malpractices? Kenneth, you want to answer it?
Yeah, so thanks for that. Yeah, so I think this goes back to that point I was talking about a little bit about the local director, the resident director. So our government basically adopts a very reasonable, practical approach to things, right? We're not a police state, right? Though some people may say so in the past, but we're definitely not that. We're very, very business-centric, very open economy. Of course, our government wants to ensure that things are well regulated so that things don't go out of hand. And in this digital age, right, as Niraj correctly pointed out, there's just so much, there's massive developments, and so that it's almost sometimes difficult to keep track with the changes. So we've all around the world, you're seeing things like scams and digital scams and all that. So government does, right, vigilantly watch over all of these things, and they do expect businesses to play their part, right? So the answer to that question would be the businesses actually have to be educated, and the government has been educating the businesses to play their part. The checks and balances and the checkpoints would be basically the way the government has set up the regulatory regime, the fact that you've got that local director and all the professionals here in Singapore, auditors, the lawyers, the corporate secretarial firms like us and consultants. We are regulated. We are literally regulated, and we are expected to play our part in, say, for example, AML, CFT, I wouldn't say enforcement, but we have our roles. We have to ensure that all monies and clients coming into Singapore, we understand the background, we understand the source of wealth, we understand the source of funds. Banks have been doing this for decades, but in recent times, the government has been really ramping up to educate all industry players, right, to understand what this means, to understand the ramifications, to ensure that we are all watchful. Everyone has to play their part together to ensure that we're all watchful to keep our business environment clean, efficient, well, orderly. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. In fact, Neeraj, we have been, as far as India is concerned, we have been significantly improving our standings in the ease of doing business ranking. And you have already commented, but do you want to, express your comments from an Indian perspective?
Yeah, so the key aspect here is the checkpoints to stop malpractices. Now, what we can do is we can do from the organization perspective, right? So though the ease has been done through the regulator perspective, and we see the impact in the market, but from an organization perspective, we need to have a sense of pride that is something that needs to be instilled in the organization by creating a culture of transparency, ethics, right? And focusing on the key corporate governance areas. And that is something that will help everybody to point out what are the malpractices, right? There will be whistles that will be blown. There'll be fingers that will be pointed to these practices, and then you can stop those practices from being continued within the organization. And at the larger level, within the market, within the departments, that's a different story altogether. So let's not go into that domain.
Yeah. Maybe, Kenneth, this question is to you. Can we consider the strategic location of Singapore as a gateway to Southeast of Asia?
Oh, certainly, yeah. So I would say definitely yes. And this has been happening for many decades, if not centuries, right? I think many businesses would typically set up here for many reasons, right? Some of which I've touched on. Having a HQ here, it's a jurisdiction which is easy to get into. It's easy to assimilate and integrate into Singapore, to set up shop here, to basically bring your employees here, the families here as well. English is spoken. I think that someone did ask what's the main communication medium. English, it's our first language. Of course, we speak Mandarin very well, thanks to government policy to have a second language, and most Singaporeans speak Mandarin. So again, very effective in dealing with China. So because of all these factors, the high level of education of the population at large, and it's a very modern, advanced country. So this helps, right? If you set up here first and then make your foray into neighboring countries, right? And we see that happening. And because, again, our location, it actually does matter. Our location is very centralized, and we're just an hour flight into, well, it's 1 hour, but that's minus the half an hour of on the runway, right? So we can get to Malaysia, to Kuala Lumpur in 1 hour, Jakarta in a little bit more time, Vietnam, Bangkok. So Southeast Asia, definitely, we are seeing so many, right? Hundreds of MNCs all use Singapore as the headquarters. And this has been happening, and our government has been pushing this for many decades already. So you'll just be one of the next guys who joined the, join the club.
Yeah, you spoke about language, but what about the culture? Is there a barrier? Do you feel that is there any kind of a cultural barrier that will be there for businesses in India who are looking out to Singapore?
So it's interesting that you asked that question, because I would like to say to you that you know it Indians are one of the biggest races here in Singapore. Right, we have a couple of major races: the ethnic Chinese, the ethnic Malays, and the ethnic Indians. Right, so and we have a basically there's no issue at all in terms of cultural barriers, especially when it comes to Indians. We are very, very familiar with Indians. Many of my best friends are Indians, and that's not just me, it's most Singaporeans as well. Our ministers are Indians, many of them are Indians as well. Many of our teachers, professionals, it's clearly not a cultural barrier at all for those who maybe haven't traveled to Singapore. Come here and visit and you will see.
Yeah, thanks. In fact, there are questions from students. In fact, they would like to pursue higher studies. I don't know how far it will fit into our context, but still, Kenneth,
No
since
problem.
you have worked there and you are familiar with the environment there, students are interested to, see the possibilities of higher education and also setting up businesses there in Singapore. What are
Sure.
your thoughts?
It is also a fact that our Singapore government has been, trying to promote and has been successful at promoting the education sector, Singapore as an education hub, right, in this part of the world. We all know that there are many traditionally many educational hubs. And say in Europe, say London is very famous for that, right? The US is very famous for that, but Singapore is actually very famous as an education hub, right, amongst Indians, amongst Vietnamese, amongst many people in the Southeast Asian region, and also as far as China, and now we're seeing even many people from the West coming here, right? So our schools are top notch, right? I won't go into too much detail, but our schools are indeed top notch. There are many private schools as well, so that's very big. There's a very big infrastructure there for those who are looking to use Singapore as education base. I was just with another client this afternoon, right, who's from South Asia, and basically wants to send her kids here. She's a high net worth individual. She wants to have a kid study and live in Singapore. A lot of the reasons are because, or a lot of them, the reason would be because it's a good education system, of course, and secondly, it's a safe environment to grow up in, right, for the younger minds. And culturally, I think it's more Eastern versus Western, right? So there's some preferences there by some people. And also the possibility of then getting a job, right? So some of my top colleagues are foreigners who've moved into Singapore years ago before they then, look for a job, they got a job, and then they settled down, they became permanent residents as well.
What are the prospects for an Ayurveda pharmacy treatment center there in Singapore?
Yeah, so Ayurvedic, medication is technically not regulated as a medicine, right? So it's not under that regime. So technically, you can actually set up that business. It's just that you have to be careful, right, not to tread into what is regulated. So clearly, medical clinics are regulated, right? So you probably have to study that a little bit more to understand where the parameters are. But technically, you could actually do that, right? Wellness kind of spas and all that. There's many here. Of course, you need to understand that there are certain costs, right? So Singapore is a small place, and real estate is a little bit on the higher side, right, when you compare with many other cities around the world. So those are probably the bigger concerns, typically, at least from a practical standpoint, when we have clients coming to us and they say, I want to start a restaurant, I want to start an Ayurvedic kind of clinic. So those are the main concerns, right, typically.
Yeah, Ajay, in fact, asked that question. So Ajay, I hope you heard it. Kiresh is really interested to know what kind of money should we, deposit in the bank to start a company in Singapore.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good one. So it used to be, a certain. Again, the answer is it depends on which bank. But in general, for corporate bank accounts under a Singapore company, many of the banks are pretty relaxed now and don't actually have a minimum, right? DBS, I think, charges a small amount, I think around 1,500 or something like that, to actually open a bank account, and then requires you to maintain a certain amount depending on certain thresholds, right? But for example, OCBC Bank, we work a lot with them. They don't have a minimum amount technically, right? They just want to make sure that the account is, of course, legitimate, and there's basically some movement. You don't leave it dormant, that kind of thing. So it's pretty easy to, as long as you can prove that you have a clear, legitimate background and a good reason for being in Singapore, we've not had any issues on that front.
And is there a basic paid up capital requirement also? Some minimum?
$1.
$1. Okay.
Yeah. We usually go with 100 because, it's easier to split if you want to give some shares to someone else, right?
Okay.
Yeah. $1 is the legal minimum.
Neeraj, you have already answered the next question, but I would like to bring it up again. There is a question from Nikhil where he is asking, what kind of banks should we prefer when we are, checking out for service, particularly from a business perspective for trading? Question is to Neeraj.
Okay, so if it's a cross border, then preferably bank which is located in both the jurisdiction, so that the paperwork and every processor would be seamless, faster, and fast. I think that's the key word, because you want it to be done faster. You don't want to be burdened with paperwork, right? And coordinating between multiple banks to get your work done. So if it's the same bank, different branches, they'll coordinate internally. You'll have one RM who can do things for you internally. So I think that works. HSBC is a good example wherein I have had good experiences. HDFC is another example where I've had good experiences. So there can be multiple banks having presence in both the jurisdictions. I think there are around 7-8 banks from India who are working in both the jurisdictions now under the agreement that both the governments have executed now. So last year, so it's seamless now with multiple Indian banks having presence there and Singapore banks in India.
In fact, Kiresh is trying to set up a business regarding the cooking oil. So he's getting into cooking oil business and he plans to set up a business in Singapore. So Kenneth, what do you think? How is the scope, and do you suggest anything for Kiresh?
Yeah, I mean, we do have clients who have done that as well. I mean, in that business sector, it really depends, where your market is. I would say if you're looking at Singapore as a retail market, it's competitive, and although it's sizable, but it's nothing the size of India, for example, right? So it would be good if you can work with many of our major local kind of like the supermarkets, right? The supermarket chains, right? So we have like the income, Fair Price, right? Fair Price, which is very big, and then as well as some of these other foreign players, but still the market is relatively smaller, right? So if you are looking at doing wholesale trading, then you have access into the region. That might be more of a strategy, more of a growth strategy there. So something to consider. But I mean, trading oil products, agri products, it's very, very common here. We have a lot of companies that set up, Singapore companies, primarily for wholesale trading, some looking to actually bring the products into Singapore.
Rajesh is asking, are there, he's looking out for a marketplace or a trade promotion council in Singapore to get connected with the local XIM community. Is there anything that you would want to suggest to Rajesh, Kenneth?
Sure. I mean, there's the Singapore Business Federation. There's quite a few of these, councils, and yeah. So
what
happy
about
to
the Singapore Trade and Industry Body? I mean, the board, the TDB, you have it there.
Yeah. So they can help too. Yeah, certainly. They're very, very helpful. So we can reach out to them, or we can help you connect with them, and they can give you some names and some contacts who you might and kind of like sit down and try to understand who in particular, Rajesh, that you'd like to speak to, what kind of profile, and then connect you as well. So that's definitely that. Our agencies, our respective government agencies, are very proactive. We'll be more than happy to actually assist.
Monica Patel is asking, what is the company maintenance cost if I establish a company in Singapore? I mean, in terms of yearly tax auditing, return filing, etc., and other costs to maintain the company in Singapore. How much would it cost per year?
So it really depends, right, on the kind of level of professionalism that you're looking at. I mean, I don't think I'll get into actual dollars and cents here. I mean, we're happy to take that offline, but there are many, many players in our market. So you have big law firms that will charge you 3 times what we charge. And then there are a lot of other guys who will charge maybe 2 times less than what we charge. So there's a very wide spectrum, and it gets really confusing for clients. My advice is don't compare based on absolute dollars in a sense, because you're not comparing apples with apples, right? It's apples with oranges and with bananas, right? It's completely different, right? And clients don't realize that. I had this conversation with someone who called in from Vietnam just this morning, and another Indian, local Indian, business here this evening at 2 hours ago, and this exact same conversation. You need a professional firm to actually grow with you, because once you're with that firm, they are the ones who know, the intimate details about your business and can also foresee the challenges that you will face. So you need to go with someone competent, right? In general, the costs in Singapore are pretty low, right? Just to give you a ballpark, right? Company registration is a couple $100, right? Less than $1,000, right? But then that itself is not enough. You can't just say, I want to register my company, and that's it. I find someone who will charge me, let's say, $800 to register a company. And then what next, right? This is Singapore dollars, right? You need a bank account open. So the question is, will your service provider help you with that? Because you can't, having a company without a bank account is no use. And believe me, that process of dealing with the banks and being able to, ensure the communication is not dropped, the ball is not dropped, that's very, very important. We've seen so many cases fail with other service providers that then come back to us and say, please help me. But then I can't do that, because the next thing is you're using that guy's local director, right? You're using that other firm's local director, not the local directors from our panel, our exclusive panel, who work only with us. And this is a big issue. And why is it a big issue? It's because many local directors in the market are tainted, right? Problems because the secretarial firms that they work with don't have any KYC, right? So you take on a business that is a little bit less than appropriate, and then the authorities have blacklisted the firm, blacklisted the local directors, and that becomes a problem. So it has to be looked at holistically, and you need to get the whole package, and then the cost is. Then you, of course, need to understand the cost for the whole package, and that would basically be determined by the kind of business that you're setting up. If you're a licensable business, you need to get the license, right? For example, if you're setting up a employment agency, or if you're setting up a travel agency, or if you're setting up a medical clinic, for example, right? Then you need a special license. So there's a separate cost for that, or asset management firm. So we're currently pitching to one of our clients to actually set up an asset management firm, and there's a big cost there. It's 6 months of going to and fro with the central bank to get the asset management license as well. So it's going to be very different from just setting up just a basic trading company, right? So there's a whole range, but it starts at as little as a couple $100 for the company registration itself, a couple $100 for the secretary on an annual basis, right? And then for local directors, it really depends. But to get a good quality, it's important to get a good quality local director who is reputed, who understands how to handle the intricacies of the regulatory concerns, right? And who's not tainted, right? That's really important. And then you need to find a secretarial firm that works closely with the banks, so you don't have any miscommunication there and your case is dropped. And then going on to your statutory filings, it's a big thing in Singapore. Our government wants to ensure that all businesses file their returns on time and accurately. So that's a very big thing here. And so again, you need someone who's competent. So happy to have a separate session to just speak directly with each case and understand a little bit more, and then I can provide a more meaningful kind of overall kind of number for the cost.
Yeah, thank you. There are still a few more questions to touch upon, because our scheduled closing us at 5:30. So sorry for that. We'll not be able to take those questions. Plus, as I said, we will be sharing the coordinates of both the speakers, so you can reach out to them for their, for your requirements. With that, we conclude, and I now invite my colleague Sandeep for the concluding remarks. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kenneth Shee and Mr. Neeraj Dubey for that detailed presentation on the legal aspects and speaking about the business opportunities in Singapore. Now we have had a lot of participants coming in for this program, and all of them with very interesting questions. Thank you for taking time out to answer all their queries. So like we said, we do have a lot of unanswered questions now in the Q&A box, but so Sure, we'll be sharing the coordinates of the speakers. Participants can reach out to them offline. And I would also like to thank the rest of the Valid Points and FastCort team, including Miss Emily Ho, Miss Rudy Santana, and Mr. Santanu Saha, for helping us organize this program. Also, let me thank each and every one of you and the participants for joining us for this program and giving us all those interesting questions. Thank you. So all of you have a great evening, and we do have a lot of programs coming up this month of May, including ones for finance professionals. So please do check out our social media pages to know more about these programs. We'll be also mailing you the invites of these programs as well. So all of you have a great evening. Thank you. Thank you for joining. Bye.
Thanks to you, Sandeep, for hosting us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This has been a real pleasure.
Sure.
Thank you, Vivek.
Bye.
you.
Bye, Neeraj. Bye, Kenneth.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a good evening.
You too.